That's right. My name is Martin Eric Ain. I'm the bass player with Celtic Frost.
All right. About how long has Celtic Frost been together?
Well, this second time around since 2001. That's when me and Tom got started again. But of course, originally we founded Celtic Frost in 1984. And before that, we got together as Hellhammer. You know, I mean, Celtic Frost did rise out of the ashes of Hellhammer in 84.
Okay. Well, tell us a little bit about the name Celtic Frost. Where did that come from?
Well, we call ourselves Hellhammer, war rebel band, you know. And of course that was all inspired by Venom, you know, first Venom record, Welcome to Hell, or the first single, In League with Satan. And but we thought that was too one-track minded, you know. And all of a sudden in the early 80s that black metal thing became fashionable, and a lot of bands were using satanic imagery or lyrics and giving themselves names that they didn't even know what it was all about. And so we thought that was just like little too narrow-minded for our own scope for where we wanted to go for. That's why we decided to disband Hellhammer and form Celtic Frost. And we were looking for a name that we thought would be more open for interpretation, that would be sort of like lyrically evil, you know, but more on a metaphorical level, you know, that you couldn't really say what it was that sounded sinister or mystical about it, you know. And we did sort of like work on an associative level, you know, in the sense that Tom came up with certain words, I came up with words, and we're just like put together and seeing if they were working, and we made those lists, you know, where we crossed out what we thought wasn't working, and at the end Celtic Frost remained.
All right. Well, you know, since you guys have been around a while, you have had a lot of influence on a lot of different bands, you know, from different genres, like, you know, really heavy stuff to extreme metal. Who are your biggest influences, would you say, as an artist and musician?
First time around, I think I already mentioned Venom. Did I mention him? Yeah, of course I did. Of course I did. Without Venom, there would have been no extreme metal the way we know it. There wouldn't have been no Hellhammer, you know. But of course, before that, it was the entire new wave of British heavy metal that was kind of like inspirational to us. Bands like Witchfinder Channel, Angel Witch, you know, were really great. And of course, the founding fathers of everything heavy metal, Black Sabbath, you know, without them there would have been nothing of it, you know. There would have most probably no Iron Maiden, no Judas Priest whatsoever, you know.
Right.
So that was definitely the metal side. But of course there was the other side, the other musical influence and inspiration as well, that made Celtic Frost become Celtic Frost, and made us record albums like Into the Pandemonium, you know, where we were experimenting with what back then was called new wave, what nowadays you would most probably call goth music, you know. There were bands like Joy Division, Bauhaus, Sisters of Mercy, Early Cure, Christian Death, you know, stuff that was labeled as death rock or as new wave back in the days. And even earlier, you know, bands like David Bowie, Roxy Music, you know. The orchestral influences, of course, came from Deep Purple, you know, experimenting or working with the London Symphony Orchestra, or with Emerson, Lake and Palmer, you know, working with classical arrangements alongside rock music, you know, that has been sort of like inspirational to us.
Excellent. How about even like maybe writers' influence, like maybe Lovecraft or Crowley?
On a lyrical level, of course. I mean,
H.R. Giger, maybe?
H.R. Giger was a major inspiration and a major influence. I mean, you can imagine we were those young kids and teens wanting to play extreme music, playing extreme music, getting our things together, and nobody took us serious back in Switzerland. There was no extreme metal scene in Switzerland. There was no extreme metal scene in the world. I mean, we were basically one of these bands that were creating the rules for extreme music, you know, because you had heavy metal, but, you know, back then the heaviest heavy metal band in Switzerland was Crocus, and Crocus was just an AC/DC pastiche, you know. It was a real good pastiche, you know, but that was the heaviest. So when we came along with Hellhammer, people looked at us like we're completely crazy. And of course we knew Giger's work, you know, because he was like widely published in Switzerland and sort of like a known figure, you know, even before winning the Oscar for Alien, you know. And so we were crazy enough to think like, hey, let's try to get in contact with him, because you got to see, we lived about half an hour from where he lived at, you know,
Okay.
walking distance, you know, half an hour
Right.
walking distance, really close,
Yeah.
you know, really close. He was living in the suburbs of Zurich, Switzerland. We were living in a different, like, sort of like suburb of Zurich, Switzerland, you know. And so we wrote him a letter, and we asked him, you know, we sent him our demos at Hellhammer and asked him if there would be possibility that we could use one of his paintings, and we already said, like, which one we would
Right.
use, you know. And he answered. He called us up at Tom's place, you know, and we were, of course, completely blown away. And he had listened to the demos, and he was really into it. He said, like, yeah, the music was really extreme, and he could see some of his work, you know, in there. And he was willing to give us that one painting if we would take a second one for a gatefold sleeve.
Okay.
And he would give us both for free.
Wow.
You know, use for the record, of course.
Right.
You know, for free. And of course, for us, that was one of the biggest boosts as artists, because all of a sudden we felt taken serious, you know,
Validated.
by what we considered to be an absolute genius, you know,
Yes.
and who was already renowned, you know. And at that time he had won the Oscar, and he was really
Right.
acclaimed. His work was published world all over, and that was just mind-blowing. And we were so awed. We knew that we first wanted to create the music that would live up to the artwork. That's why we didn't use the artwork, although we already had the rights
Right.
to, you know, basically use it for Apocalyptic Raids, the first and only Hellhammer record we did. And we didn't even use it for the first Calvin's record, Morbid Tales, because
Right.
even then we said, like, no, we got to get better, you know, it's got to be more to the point. That's why we used his artwork for To Megatherion, for, you know, for the second full-length album that the Celtic Frost did. And of course, besides that, you know, writers like Crowley, H.P. Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard, of course, the occult writings of Eliphas Levi, you know, who was like an occult historian, a magician in the 19th century, you know, were really influential on our work, you know. I mean, what you got to realize is back then in the day, you know, in a country like, especially a country like conservative country like Switzerland, it was really hard to come about, you know, the works of these authors. You know, it's not like nowadays in the internet where you just Google something and all of a sudden you have like all internet libraries with occult literature going back to the 12th century. You know, where you can read the Malleus Maleficiarum. You know, the Witch's Hammer in full length in Latin. You know, in original text, and you have several text editions with translations, and you can have everything, you know, at your fingertips within like a couple of seconds. You know, through the internet. It wasn't like that. You had to go to libraries. You know, you had to go to bookstores, ask for things to be ordered. I mean, if you wanted to get a hold of the Satanic Bible by Anton Sander Labbe, you know, back then, it was only published in English by Avon Books, which was, of course, a big publisher in the U.S. You know, but you know, nobody had that, you know, in stock in Switzerland. So you had to go to a bookstore, and people were looking at you, Satanic Bible. You know, I mean, the next second you thought, you know, they would call the police. So it wasn't that easy to get a hold. But of course, the more influential, the more inspirational it was. You know, to be able to read those authors and indulge in their works.
That probably made you want to get it more, if it was difficult to obtain.
Yes, of course. I mean, of course. First of all, you were taking more time reading through it. It's not like, you know, nowadays when you go on the internet, you read some passages and then you maybe forward a couple of pages and read something else, and then you think like, okay, I can go back to that anytime I want to. You know, back then, if you, for example, some of the older works, I had to rent out. I had to get it from a library, you know, so you only had a limited time span where you could basically, you know, read through it. So of course I was devouring, you know, those works. And of course one thing leads to the other, you know. I mean, from one author you have the footnotes where you find more authors or other works that are really interesting, you know. So, and I've been following that path ever since those days. I think I have quite an extensive library nowadays, you know, because I like to have the books with me, be able to go back, take them out, and actually open up the pages and read through them, you know.
I understand, I do too. Maybe tell me a little bit about the whole face paint thing. Where did that come about? Why? Have you always done that?
No. We started with that at the late stages of Hellhammer, and I think one of the... It's hard to say what the inspirations were. Of course, it was the time as well. You had King Diamond doing it with Merciful Fate.
Yes.
And the first Merciful Fate record was sort of like, that was the competition back then, you know. I mean, he was one of the only guys really calling himself satanic and also acting it out, you know, for it to seem somewhat serious, you know. Of course, it was used before, and it was just something that added to the entire mystique, and I couldn't really tell you what it was exactly. I think it was just something that was in the zeitgeist, you know, and, you know, and what was making those times shape up. Because I remember we were putting on this face paint, and then we got to see the first pictures from first promotional pictures from Slayer, and they were wearing sort of like something similar. Yeah. With them, it was a little bit more structured, you know. With us, it was more smeared, you know. It was more like early corpse paint nowadays. But we didn't whiten the face. We just used the black the eyes and the parts of the mouth or the nose, you know, like you would bleed black out of your nose, something like that, you know. And so of course we felt you know, we felt like, okay, this seems to be something that's going on worldwide, but of course there weren't that many bands doing it. No. Slayer, for example, already skipped it with this, you know, they didn't have anything similar to that already in Show No Mercy, you know. Right.
It's interesting. I haven't seen it a lot, that's why I asked.
Yeah, nowadays, I mean, you haven't seen a lot. In Europe, of course, with the second wave of black metal, you know, with the Scandinavian, most certainly Norwegian black metal, it became, of course, a mainstay for black metal nowadays. I mean, any black metal band, most of the black metal bands use face paint or corpse paint to such an extent that it has become like a complete uniform and you know, and somehow sometimes really hard to take serious, you know, because every 13-year-old kid is like donning, you know, studs and corpse paint and thinks he's completely evil now, you know, which of course, you know, is not the case. Not the case all the time.
What last words would you like to give to your Rebel Access fans who are going to be watching this interview?
Last words. You know, it's not up for me to decide what my last words will be, you know. Usually last words is what you say before you realize that they were the last words, you know. So that's why most of the time last words from most of the people are not recorded, you know, because they would sound sort of like stupid, just like my last words right now, you know. Those were my last words, by the way.
All right, well, thank you very much. You guys are about to see some live footage here on Rebel Access of Celtic Frost at the Metro. Check it out.